I'm Brett Jozsa down here in San Clemente, California in my gallery showroom. This video is going to be a long process video on how I made this double live edge coffee table with a glass insert. So I kind of wanted to restructure the YouTube channel and get back on here and kind of go through the full process of how I create stuff and why I create stuff. As you can see around me, everything I made is accumulated in this environment. It's a full collection. I end up doing canvas, textured wall canvas art, 3D art. I got a variety of statues and sculptures. I do a whole cement line of products, all designed on a 3D CAD program, prototypes, silicone molds, casting, all sorts of fun stuff. So that's kind of my goal with this channel, is I just want to kind of bring it back to life and bring everybody along, see if you guys can pick up a tip or a trick or something along the way. So pretty excited about it. But first off, let's dive into this guy and get going.
So one of the main reasons why I wanted to make a table like this was I have been making a lot of the epoxy river tables. And although I still firmly believe that they are a great solution for taking wood that would otherwise be firewood or trash in some eyes, it is a viable way to mend pieces of wood together to make, bigger lengths, bigger widths, give it a little more character. I know it was kind of trending for a while and ended up kind of dying out in the trend world. However, when my customers come into my showroom, some of them haven't seen it before. Some of them are very interested in it. I do a lot of commissions with them. I will continue to do commissions with them. I still think it is a fun way to make some creative pieces, but you can only do so many. I like to kind of change things up a little bit as I go along, and wanted to start to do a little bit of glass inserts, steel inserts, cement inserts, that kind of thing. So I have some plans for a variety of that type of table in many different forms. So the first one was this, and that's why I chose to at least start with the glass, keep it simple. I'm truly not a big fan of the wavy glass inserts and all that. I'm sure if you've been watching stuff like this, you've probably seen them through time, but figured I wanted to keep it with a little bit more of a modern edge and just keep a nice straight clean glass cut right down the center. And with the double live edge feature, at least you get to see some of the live edge down in through the table as well as the outside, so it gives it kind of a rustic modern feel. So I ended up cutting these two pieces out of two larger slabs. They were as close as I could get to being equal. One obviously is fairly eaten up, and I was able to deal with that later in the video, and wasn't too worried about it. Tables like this with a rustic live edge, I'm all about keeping as much character as I can. Some of my tables I'll end up leaving completely unfilled, and I do like that look. However, on one like this with the glass on top, it's going to be used as a coffee table. I was pretty set on filling everything that needed to be filled, so you had a nice smooth surface. A lot of customers with children, they talk about the stuff that they end up sticking on the tables, and it's going to get all inside of all the cracks and crevices. So this one I did fill. As far as the live edge goes, I do like these nylon brushes. I end up using them quite a bit. They work on slabs like this with a live edge that didn't have some, crazy crevices and bark. They'll clean it up really nice. They do leave a little bit of marring, not as much as a wire brush, so I will tend to do them vertically down the whole path and then come back kind of horizontally like this and try to reach in as deep as I can all along it, taking out as many scuff marks as possible. I go through and kind of hand sand anything that I see later on in the process when I start to do the finishing. But overall, for these types of edges, those brushes work very well. Then I'm trying to just measure everything out. I wanted to kind of split the difference between wood and glass down the center of each thing. I was trying to get a good composition for creating a file to run them equally down on the CNC. I was going to kind of mount everything on there and get it to run as straight as possible, both pieces at the same time, which you'll see later on in the video. Made a few reference marks on the corners for some leg kickers, since this is going to be a coffee table and you're going to be walking past it. I kind of carve out some of those sharper edges so that it's a little smoother, kind of goes with the flow of the corner of the live edge. I end up like softening everything. This was the really eaten up slab. I tend to go about cleaning these beetle remnants in a lot of different ways. I was playing around with this mini wire brush set up on this Dremel and trying to just get everything that I could out of there. I end up using P-Tech for some of these rougher, more rustic looking live edge pieces. I like the way the finish is. It's a little more matte and kind of keeps a little bit of a rustic feel. So instead of using CA glue and epoxy, I already knew I was going to fill. There were so many voids in this table that I was just already pre-planned to use the P-Tech. And you pretty much got to do whatever you got to do to get those things out of there. I got the air compressor and I'll pick and blow like that. I use a wire brush, kind of all sorts of random little tools to get as deep as I can. Anything that's loose, any rotted wood, I'll just go through and clean and blow everything out and get it ready for fill. Like I said in the beginning, I already had surfaced these, and this is the bottom. So I figured while I had the opportunity before I throw it on the CNC, I was going to get it all the way to 120 at least, so that everything was nice and flat. I usually don't go through and fill with P-Tech until I'm at 120, 180. It's a little less problematic. If you're at 80 and start filling, you're filling a lot of the voids around it. So I try to at least get up to that 120, 180. I probably go back and forth here and there depending on what I'm doing. But if you haven't used this P-Tech, you really got to try it. 2-part kind of wood filler, dries really fast. I end up 20 minutes in and I can pretty much hit everything and sand it all off. On a massive one like this, where I end up doing a lot of fill, it doesn't fill it the first time. It does grow inside of the crevices, which I thought was really interesting. I've never seen a filler that will lift up like that. But as you can see there, like when you push it in, it does grow and kind of fill the space. It almost expands inside of it. It's pretty neat. And the fast curing time, you just can't beat that. It's like a wood filler version of CA glue that works for some applications, not all. I don't use it on smooth epoxy tables on top. I will use it to fill voids and cracks underneath them. But when I'm doing, a nice like Rubio finish on top of an epoxy table or something like that, I choose not to really go for the P-Tech route. But that first fill will leave some voids, especially on this massive scale. So I end up doing the first fill, trying to get the majority. As you can see there, you'll have like some remnants. So I will do a second swipe on most of it. If I'm going to fill that much, it will get into the wood grain. So depending on what finish you're going to use and all that plays a part in the staining. And, so you got to be kind of careful. Even with that second time, you'll see there's still some little pits. So then I'll go through and fine tune. I'll blow that stuff out and fill any little voids that I have to do. Now on these, I know not a lot of people like the fact that I end up using like a black Rubio, but it does bring out the rich brown color, and especially in this English walnut. So I kind of wasn't worried about the external staining. Then I took them over to, that I was finishing the bottom of the pieces, and I filled the bottom. I got them all ready. Then I brought it over to the CNC and I did first surface passes, got everything lined up exactly where I wanted it to be, so I could just do a straight rectangle file on the CNC, and that way it would cut it out exactly where I needed it to be. So I did surface everything first, and then I ended up running a program to do that rectangle cutout, and I actually left. Originally the slabs were a little longer than needed to be. for the final cut. So I let it cut on the inside of the edges, and then I end up cutting off the edges and actually like squaring out the table. But this was a pretty straightforward process. You could probably see in that right top corner there, that first pass, sometimes it happens. It dug in on me. Didn't ruin anything. Didn't dig in too deep. So I was happy about that. But sometimes things happen, and what are you going to do? Hopefully you're not ruining a piece over it. I'm fairly new to the CNC world, so I do what I can. I've been able to play around with this. This is the Foreman 4-foot by Onefinity. So far, so good. Really nice machine. I haven't had any issues with it. So I got the recess done. As you can see, the ends are still a little long. I'm going to end up cutting those off. Just wanted to do a little test fit with the glass, make sure I was in the right zone before I pulled my little sacrificial hold downs there, little 1-bys, just whatever you got to do to get stuff like that to stay down. You're going to do it. And so then I proceeded to square everything up, tried to keep everything in line with where the glass was going to sit. So I'm kind of in a freestand world here on my workshop table, and tried to get everything lined up to where the glass is going to fit. The cool thing about this one in particular was, yes, I wanted it to be 24 inches wide for the glass recess, but I had that wiggle room, right? So I mainly just trying to get those ends exactly where I needed them. I don't have the Festool 75, so this guy only cuts down 2 inches. So I end up just kind of taking a Sawzall and cleaning up the edges. Not a big deal. I try to just stay on the outside of that line, and then I can sand the remnants back too, just making sure I don't nick what I don't need to. I come from a construction background, so I'm more inclined to use Sawzalls and construction tools for certain things versus all the purist woodworkers out there that would end up kind of going the chisel route. I'm just used to a certain way of doing things, and it gets me by. Just mainly trying to clean everything up so I can get ready for another just glass insert test and make sure that this thing ended up being recessed as much as it did need to be, which after doing the little test here, I did find out that there was some spots that I wasn't happy with as far as the reveal on top. I wanted to get it as flush as possible. I wasn't planning on having any bumpers or any shims or anything that was going to sit. I wanted the glass to just sit directly on the wood and leave it at that. And once again, on the top side of this slab, ended up getting as much out as I could of everything that was loose from all these bug holes. Still surprising how much this one was eaten up versus the other one. This was out of the center spots on 2 large slabs, but they were just the most equal parts of those 2 slabs. So I kind of had no choice other than to use these. They were from the same tree. I wanted them to match as much as possible. Wasn't really worried about the character being more in this one than the other one, but it is what it is sometimes. You just kind of, got to do what you got to do. When I design a lot of my stuff, I kind of see what materials and what slabs I have available. I don't necessarily go out and purchase things for specific reasons unless it's a commission or something. So if I have certain slabs around, I mainly kind of stand out there and see what the wood wants me to do with it versus the metal that I have and what kind of base I can design for it afterwards. And I think that's one of the true passions that come along with this as far as just the creating part. I try to use what I have when I can for whatever I can design in my head. I just love having an idea for something and kind of bringing it to life through this process. It's just so much more gratifying than all the construction I've done my whole life. It truly is a fun thing to be a part of. It's a strange industry as far as selling products and stuff like that, which I'll get into in some future videos. And I do plan on having some people come by and having some conversations with me in the future. And we're going to talk all about that kind of stuff. But I'll spare you the actual P-Tech fill on this one, just trying to get everything sanded off again. It really is amazing stuff. There's a few different color choices. I use black on things that I know are going to lean more towards that black setting, but this dark walnut version that they have is blends in a lot with a lot of these wood colors, so it is nice. And then just using the little laser pecker guy to get some branding on the bottom. The portability of that is definitely worth having around if you don't, versus some of the larger lasers and having to lug them. And then just trying to get to the end finish line on the coatings here. I do use my Festool to kind of freestyle roundovers. I know a lot of people, I mean, on live edge, of course, you're going to do what you need to do to soften the edges. But even on my rectangle tables with a square edge profile, I'm either doing like a micro bevel, or if I do a slight roundover, I tend to not use a router. I personally do more damage with a router, leaving the guide wheel lines that I have to take out. So I just kind of got used to using the sander to just do the roundover and or hand sanding in one way or another. Then I'll take my air compressor, I'll blow off all the dust that I can. I end up using the mineral spirits. I do use Rubio monocoat to do my finishes on most of my tables. It's kind of been my go-to for quite some time. I see everybody dipping into these UV finishes, which I probably will get my hands on at some point. I'm never in that big of a hurry. I do like the next day process to be able to at least do the next step. And usually with the Rubio, I'll end up doing, on walnut, I'll do 2 coats and then I'll use their Sheen Plus. So, everybody's got their choice. You kind of grow with it as you go and learn things, and you do what you can. Everybody's got a preference in this industry, but doing one last glass check, make sure I'm still in line with the way that I want it to be at the end. I did leave a slight bump out on the wood versus the glass, just so that just in case somebody bumped into it with something, they wouldn't directly hit the glass. I was kind of contemplating that in my head as far as the design goes. I would have wanted it flush, but I did decide to leave like an eighth on each side so that the glass slightly is inset from the edge of the wood. But all in all, it worked out great. And then I moved on to the Rubio. And like I said, it's not that I get a lot of slack for it, but I know everybody loves the color of wood. To be honest with you, was never really a big wood fan. If it's with black, it makes sense to me for the tone and the accent color. But I'm not really a big fan of light color woods and redwoods and all that stuff. And the walnut has such great potential, but I can only find it when I end up using the black, and it just darkens it to a nice brown, warm color. And so that's my preference. Everybody's got their thing. On occasion, if there's black epoxy or whatnot, then I will use pure. If it's a commission, I give them the choice. I don't really care either way. I just love the process of making stuff like this. So whatever anybody wants, by all means, if you want blue epoxy in your table, I'll do it for you. I'm not a fan of that stuff, but I will do it. So either way, when it's just mine and I'm going to end up putting it in my showroom, then I got free range to do what I need to do. And my go-to is to black it out. And you can see right there, I mean, it just gives it a nice, rich color. And I've used that on Claro walnuts and all sorts. Hesitant on some of the Bastogne stuff with the light woods. I have done it. If it is like a Bastogne and there is light woods, it does give it almost like a gray look in the lighter spots on the wood. But English walnut, I tend to always, use the black. I've used charcoal if it's got, maybe like a more grayish tone environment that it's going to go into. Charcoal works great too. It does give it like pretty much similar to black, but it has kind of gray undertones in it. And so, but either way, I just can't get over the black. So that's all. I love using it, and it is a great product. And like I said, with walnut, I will use, which is what most of my tables end up being. I end up using 2 coats, and then I'll go back to their Sheen Plus and do that. And I'll use these Milwaukee buffers with those abrasive pads, the non-abrasive pads or whatever you want to call them. They work good. They've been getting a little cheap. I don't know who the manufacturer is. I get them on Amazon. They fit that buffer, and I haven't been too happy lately with them. They're leaving, stuff's flying off of them. I'm having issues with them, but they get the job done. When you end up ragging it off, it really doesn't matter either way. But the less little pieces and grit going on, the better. For those edges, when I try to get the Rubio down into these live edges, I just kind of cut a piece of that non-abrasive pad, not the disc one, but I have some square sheets, and I'll just kind of dip it in there and get it all into all the nooks and crannies, and just buff it off. I mean, if you're watching this video, I'm sure you're probably familiar by now with the way Rubio works, but it is a game changer. There's rare things that I would use poly on. Some of my more rustic, like timber beam series, I'll end up going with a poly just because it's kind of my only choice. But if I can, by all means, I'll use Rubio. Even if I spray live edge open, unfilled pieces with like a tung oil, I'll still use the Rubio monocoat on the flat surfaces, but the tung oil will get all in the sides. Sometimes you just can't get the Rubio into some really wild nooks. But the glass fit good, and I was happy enough with it to move on to the base. And hopefully you're still with me. I know I've been yapping through this whole video, and it's kind of what I do. So if you're still with me, then I'm moving on to the base fabrication. And I wanted it to be heavy and bold, and it was kind of a complicated design platform because I knew I needed to be able to get some brackets underneath that weren't going to be intrusive to the glass design. I wanted to keep it as minimalistic as possible, but I did want it to have a crazy, bold, wide look. So 4-inch stock tubing was what I went with. I love my Evolution saw. However, when you're doing miter cuts like that, it doesn't really make it all the way through. So luckily I was able to, I tried a few things prior to this, but this was the best shot of what I ended up doing that worked out well in the end. Cutting it, going back to the Sawzall, chopping what I needed to, trying to line everything up, get the cleanest cut possible. When I do multiple cuts and miters like that, I will, most of the time, I'll tend to kind of take all of them together, and I'll clamp them together as aligned as possible, just so I can do a good cleanup, because there was some burrs and edges that weren't matching. I just want to make sure everything's as equal as possible before I move on to the next step. So I'll clamp them together, clamp them down to the table. I do end up using my Milwaukee grinder. Milwaukee is my go-to for a lot of versions of all this stuff. I don't see a lot of woodworkers and furniture makers using Milwaukee stuff, but I love it. I've always used it through the construction industry. Everybody seems to lean on DeWalt or something, but so far I've been able to incorporate Milwaukee's brand into most of the things I do. They just seem to have, a tool for all the stuff that I like to use and the way I like to use it. I know some of my stuff is probably unconventional as far as my process and the way that I end up doing things. But I get it done. You know what you know. You get used to what you do. I try to upgrade and grow with everything as I go. But whatever I need to get my hands on to be able to accomplish the job at hand, then I'm going to do it. But I have a pretty big collection of Milwaukee stuff that gets me by all this, and I definitely appreciate the quality in their tools. And so I built that little fab table a while ago. It's definitely time for an upgrade. So if you are a subscriber or plan to be, I will be making a new version of that table, a larger version. I have conversations with friends of mine all the time. They see me on the ground, which you will see me in a little bit, because certain table bases just are too large to be thrown up on top of a table anyway. I don't really see the need in it, but there are lighter weight ones that I would like to have a bigger platform for. So far this thing's gotten me by. I'm kind of growing into all this. I haven't been doing any of this that long. It's that I'm always growing and learning as I go, and that's the funnest part for me, is just to continue to grow into the craft and learn new things and figure things out. And you don't get any better way than going through the processes. People could tell me this and that all day long, but until I'm experiencing what I need to change, that's just how I kind of move forward. But trying to line things up, make sure everything's square. I've literally had just that set of clamps this whole time, and everything's been kind of working for me. Not the best welder in the world, but I get by. MIG has been my go-to. I do have a TIG welder. I haven't been able to put in the time to perfect that, so I don't really use that a lot of the time when I'm making furniture, but I plan to in the future. So far I've changed my method of grinding these outer welds on these. I start with a 40 flap disc, and I've tried multiple hard abrasive discs. It just doesn't work for me. So I will take a 40, get it down as close as I can. Try not to dip everything. If you're familiar, you're familiar. But then I ended up getting another paddle grinder for this part, and I got that little 4-inch. Actually, I think it's a 5-inch. Just foam disc for the sandpaper. So I use that Mirka screen sandpaper, and I throw those on there. And then at the very end, I'll hit it with just a random orbital that I had as just a spare sander. I was beating up my Festool so much trying to get things ready. Powder coat guy I use, he's great and gets me by. Doesn't, if there's scratches, I mean, if you're familiar, you're familiar, but if you leave too much behind, you're going to see that through the powder coat. I had to kind of grow into all that and learn what you can and can't get away with as far as the powder coating version. So I try to clean them up as best as I can. And that was my little like 3-phase process and how I end up dealing with that. And they turn out great. I try to see them in all different lights, make sure there's no dipping, big gouges, scratches, any little little holes or anything. So you learn and learn and learn as you go. And so you can see how I do end up on the ground. And I've luckily enough in my shop there, I have this one specific spot that I always go to that's perfectly flat. I've checked this thing all sorts of different ways. So that spot, even though it looks a little beat up on the cement, it is true in this whole entire square space that I have right where I keep my welder. So fortunate enough to be able to like use that as my go-to every time. Been able to pull everything off. By the time I'm done, I flip them over. I check them on other flat surfaces. I don't have wobble. Most of the time, I end up using, rib nuts and adjustable feet anyway. So that kind of takes that out of it. But more importantly, like the visual from side to side is what my kind of like overall inspection of when I'm finished with a project like this. So I kind of eyeball it at an angle, and if everything's parallel from one leg to the next, that's the main concern I have. You don't want to make like a slightly crooked table where when you're finally done and you go meet up with the slab, or the top for that matter, then it's off a little bit, even an eighth of an inch. So you want everything to, when they're visually in somebody's house, I want it to at any visual aspect when you're walking up on it, I want it to look like as perfect as and symmetrical as possible. So I've been able to do that with this spot on the ground. And like I said, I wouldn't really throw that's a eighth inch steel. By the time I'm done with that, I wouldn't really be throwing that up on a workbench in my environment anyway. I just don't have too much space, so everything's got to kind of roll out of the way. When I was lining it up there, I do use little shims, and so I'll square everything up, use little shims as I need to. Sometimes I can't clamp everything together, so I'll tack it all, flip it, and start throwing beads, to the best of my ability. I know which ones are going to be hidden. I know which ones I'm going to grind off. So I try to stay accordingly. So far, I've been happy with the way that I've been able to weld. I know there's always room for improvement, and I'm always ready to improve. So sometimes I can take my time. Sometimes I got to get stuff done, and mainly trying not to stagger in the middle of a weld that's going to be exposed, so that I don't have to do any cleanup. I don't grind my inner welds on a lot of the furniture I make, and that's just simply based on the price points. The amount that I sell certain things at, it just would be a waste of time. So I do offer that for certain clients, customers, if they want to go the extra mile and pay a little extra to have everything perfect. But usually when presented with that choice, people don't want to do that anyway. So I don't bother actually going that extra mile and making everything as perfect as it could be as far as grinding off all my welds, which ends up being a personal preference for whatever you're trying to do. I know everybody's different, but we all got to, have a line somewhere. Now I'm just finishing the main structure, trying to get ready for the support system that I came up with to have everything mounted to. So I ended up using just some eighth inch angle iron. I used to use tabs, and I'm just not a big fan of the tabs. They are kind of bendy. I weld both sides, and they ended up just not. I mean, in this scenario especially, they're just kind of free hanging. I need as much support as possible for those walnut strips, and since I'm kind of minimalizing the support underneath, and it's just going to be centralized right in the center of the boards themselves, I wanted to have it as structurally sound as possible to not have any warping down the road to bend the glass. And so I did end up adding these little gussets on the outside for some extra holes, but angle iron ends up getting me where I need to be for some of the insides of some of my bases. Provides, an unlimited amount of hole patterns, depending on how crazy you're getting with the threaded inserts. Something like this, I used to drill out more holes than I needed, until I kind of figured out what I really needed to do to support the tops. I end up just kind of minimalizing the hole patterns at this point and just making sure that the structure underneath is going to support the top and keep it, flat down, but then allow for the expansion and the seasonal shifting of the wood. Wood gets kind of tricky sometimes. I'm still kind of trying to figure all this out. So, as I go, you learn. I haven't had any real dramatic failures. So I've been doing good so far. This was just kind of a test run here to see how everything was going to work out, make sure the glass sits on there the way that I wanted after fabricating that much. Wasn't sure if I had everything as straight as was going to be with it just naturally sitting on there. I clamped some just one bys on there to make sure the wood wasn't going to fall and the glass was going to go shattering on me. So, and I just had some little triangle pieces left over from another project. Just decided to use those in the corners for some little gussets. Cut the ends off, kind of round them out. Stick them there for just that one extra hole. So I'll have a strip of holes down the angle iron, and then I'll have an additional hole in these that'll kind of give it that balancing support, from shifting over to the left and right. The 4-inch base legs themselves act as a nice support as well. I just wanted an extra, hole on the outside just to give it a little bit of width, so it wasn't just balancing on a center strip of threaded inserts, which worked out great. Nothing better than being able to burn up some scraps along the way and get what you need done. So I have a variety of ways that I end up drilling these things. It does get kind of daunting if you're drilling with, just a cordless, depending on the amount of holes you end up drilling. So I'll start it with a regular bit, and then I will use a step bit just to get what I need to for a little bit of spacing with the 1/4-inch insert. I've caught some slack over using step bits for that kind of thing, but like I said, you're going to use what you're going to use, and we're all a little different, and that gets me by. I do have a Evolution mag drill, but on skinny surfaces, I honestly just don't trust it. It just doesn't seem to work the greatest. But these rib nuts for the adjustable feet, and that's pretty much it. Dropped it off at the powder coat place, ended up getting it powder coated, and he always does a beautiful job. I usually will go with a matte black finish, which has just kind of a low sheen, like kind of almost satiny, which does work for most of the stuff that I end up putting in my showroom. All my customers seem to go with it too. I've tried hammered versions and whatnot, but most of my bases end up black unless it's an industrial thing, and then I end up kind of taking that into my own hands. But overall, the project went well. I'm happy with the end result. I was happy to finally get some time to make something like this. I have so many similar but different ideas for all sorts of furniture and art pieces that I'm currently working on, will be working on, a lot of fun commissions as well. And so if you're still hanging in there, I really do appreciate it. I finally getting around to kind of restructuring this channel. It's been a minute, and obviously I have a lot of growth to do on this. So if you join me for the journey, I will adjust and alter things as I go, and we're all getting a little better through each thing that we just keep trucking along on. But yeah, so the overall dimensions were about 45 peak to peak. I kept it at 16 inches tall, and the wood slabs, which are the longest extension, is about 48 inches. So pretty cool piece. Hopefully it sits in there for a little while. Sometimes I make some ones that took me a while to create, and then they end up going first. So I end up having to make something to take its place. I guess that's part of the game, but still happy to be doing this stuff. I really love working with my hands. I love making stuff, love creating stuff, always have. And this has definitely been a really cool experience. Happy to be on here to share some of the details. If you're watching this because you currently do stuff like this, then keep at it, man. It's a great thing to be able to create and make your own tangible stuff. If you're just watching this because you were just interested in how it was made, and you're thinking about getting into this stuff, I highly encourage you to just get whatever you can. Get your hands on some tools and just start, because the growth is important, and nobody's good right off the bat. And I haven't even been doing this kind of stuff that long, and I was able to get to these levels. I think we're all kind of created equal in a certain way. So whatever you can do to follow that passion is super important. Well, that's pretty much it for this one. And I do have some more in the works, and I appreciate you hanging in there till the end. Always accept constructive criticism. So by all means, leave me some suggestions in the comments, and hope to see you on the next one.